Dylan casually dropped the sedan keys into Valerie's palm, right there in my kitchen, saying I wouldn't be driving much anymore. I set my coffee cup down without making a sound and watched Catalina look anywhere but at my face. The morning sun streamed through the window, but the room felt cold. Dylan's voice carried that tone he used when he thought he knew what was best for me. Valerie's fingers closed around the metal keys like she'd been waiting for this moment her entire life. The keys made a soft jingling sound as they settled into her manicured palm. She examined them with the satisfied look of someone who just inherited a prize. Catalina fidgeted with her phone, clearly uncomfortable, but unwilling to speak up against her husband's decision. The kitchen smelled like fresh coffee and yesterday's disappointment, a combination that seemed fitting for this moment. I smiled, too calmly, too sweetly, and whispered just loud enough for them to hear. "How interesting." My voice didn't shake even though my heart was pounding. They had no idea what was coming. While they stood there looking pleased with themselves, I pulled out my phone and typed a quick message to my attorney. "Today's the day we discussed. Please proceed." The kitchen felt smaller suddenly, like the walls were closing in, but I wasn't the one who should be worried. I took another sip of coffee and waited for their next move, knowing mine was already 3 steps ahead. I walked slowly to my bedroom, each step deliberate and measured. My fingers traced the edge of the hospital wristband still circling my wrist from last week's procedure. 3 deep breaths helped steady my nerves. The hallway seemed longer than usual, giving me time to think about everything that had led to this moment. From the top dresser drawer, I pulled out a thin blue folder that had been waiting patiently for weeks. The label read, "Mobility Trust," in my careful handwriting. Inside lay the executed title transfer and lien filing, both notarized and legally binding. Every signature was mine, every date was correct, every detail had been checked twice by my attorney. The papers rustled softly as I turned them over, remembering the day I'd signed them at the law office. The lawyer had smiled when I explained my situation. "Smart thinking," she'd said. The documents felt heavier than paper should, weighted with the power to change everything. Now I photographed each document with my phone, uploading them to a secure cloud folder. The files saved with little pinging sounds. My hands were steadier than they'd been in weeks. Downstairs, I could hear Dylan and Catalina talking in hushed voices with Valerie. They thought they were so clever. They had no idea that every move they'd make today was something I'd already planned for. Valerie jingled the keys loudly as I came back downstairs, announcing she would pop by the DMV this afternoon to get everything sorted. Her voice carried the confidence of someone who believed the hardest part was over. Catalina nodded along enthusiastically, already planning how they'd divide up my independence between them. The 3 of them looked like conspirators sharing a secret, completely unaware that I held all the real secrets. I settled back into my chair and asked quietly, "Do you have the title with you?" The room went silent. Even the kitchen clock seemed to stop ticking. Dylan's face went blank as he realized he hadn't thought about paperwork. Catalina's mouth opened, but no words came out. Valerie's confident expression wavered like a candle flame in the wind. "Well," Dylan stammered, "I figured you'd just handle that part." His voice trailed off as he began to understand this might not be as simple as taking keys from a forgetful old woman. The assumption that I'd simply cooperate with their plan was written all over their faces. I reached into my purse and pulled out my spare keyring, the one with the small engraved plate that read "Leased" in tiny letters. I handed it to them with a gentle smile. "You'll need these too," I said, watching confusion bloom across their faces like flowers opening in reverse. The morning was about to get much more interesting. Catalina pulled out her phone and called our insurance company, putting it on speaker with the confident air of someone handling business. She asked the agent about adding Valerie as a primary driver on my policy. Her voice was crisp and professional, the same tone she used when she thought she was managing my life better than I could. I watched her pace around the kitchen, gesturing as if the agent could see her through the phone. The agent's response cut through the kitchen like a knife. "I'll need to speak with the owner or trustee of the vehicle." Catalina looked confused and pointed at me. I raised my hand slowly. like a student in class. The irony wasn't lost on me. They'd assumed I was too old to handle my own affairs, yet here I was, the only one who actually understood what was happening. "Ma'am," the agent continued, "our records show this vehicle has a recorded lien through the Gray Mobility Trust. Any changes to the policy require written authorization from the trustee." The silence that followed was deafening. I could practically hear their plans crumbling. The professional language seemed to confuse them more than simple words would have. Catalina's face went from confused to angry in seconds. She ended the call and turned to me with hard eyes. "What lien?" she demanded. "What is this Gray Mobility Trust?" Her voice rose with each word. Valerie still held the keys, but they suddenly seemed to weigh much more than before. I stood up and calmly walked to the kitchen sink, pulling out the bottle of lemon cleaner. I began wiping down the already spotless counter, while Catalina demanded answers, her voice getting sharper with each question. The familiar motion of cleaning helped keep my hands busy, while my mind stayed focused. "The car belongs to the Gray Mobility Trust," I said simply, scrubbing the same clean spot over and over. "I'm the trustee." My voice was matter-of-fact, like I was discussing the weather. Catalina's reflection in the window showed her mouth hanging open. Valerie laughed, a sharp, brittle sound. "Oh, we'll sort all this out at the DMV," she said, waving the keys dismissively. "These legal things are just paperwork, nothing we can't handle." Her confidence hadn't cracked yet, but I could see tiny fissures forming around the edges. My phone buzzed against the counter. A text from my attorney confirmed that the lien was now visible in the state records database. Anyone who looked up the car would see exactly what I'd done. I smiled to myself as I folded the cleaning cloth. They had no idea how deep this rabbit hole went, or that I'd been digging it for weeks. 20 minutes later, we all stood in my driveway, watching Valerie try to start the car. She turned the key and the engine purred to life, but when she tried to shift out of park, the dashboard lit up with warning lights. The car's smart lease device, which I'd quietly installed for theft protection, was doing exactly what I'd paid extra for it to do. The screen flashed, "Restricted, unauthorized driver" in bright red letters. Valerie tried again, pressing buttons and checking mirrors, like the problem was something simple she could fix. The car refused to budge from park, its computer brain following instructions I'd programmed weeks ago. "What's wrong with this thing?" Valerie muttered, her confidence finally starting to crack. She honked the horn twice, as if that would convince the car to cooperate. The electronic beeping echoed through our quiet neighborhood. Mrs. Sanders from next door chose that exact moment to walk by with her small dog. She slowed down, clearly curious about the scene unfolding in my driveway. Her presence made everything more real, more public. I waved at her pleasantly, while Valerie continued to wrestle with a car that would never let her drive it. The audience was perfect timing. Dylan cornered me in the hallway later, his voice low and urgent. "Mom, you're making this way harder than it needs to be," he said, standing close enough that I could smell his cologne. The same scent he'd worn since college, when he thought he knew everything about the world. I looked up at my son, my boy who used to bring me drawings from school, and said calmly, "I'm making it legal." Each word came out clear and firm, no room for misunderstanding. His face shifted as he realized his mother wasn't going to roll over and play dead. "But you told Valerie she could have the car," he said, his voice carrying a hint of desperation. "You promised." "Did I?" I asked, tilting my head slightly. "When exactly did I promise that?" He opened his mouth, then closed it, then opened it again, like a fish gasping for air. He couldn't remember a specific conversation, because it had never happened. I walked to my bedroom and opened the small safe hidden behind my jewelry box. Inside, among other important papers, sat a spiral notebook with promises in paper written on the cover in my handwriting. Time to show them what I'd been keeping track of all along. Back in the living room, I opened the notebook to pages filled with dates, quotes, and careful observations. March 15th. Dylan called me forgetful about paying the water bill on time, I read aloud. March 22nd. Catalina said she'd handle my electric bill, then paid it 3 days late with a penalty. Dylan's face went pale as he recognized his own words coming back to him. Each entry was dated and detailed, showing a pattern of them treating me like I couldn't manage my own life. April 8th, promised to help with grocery shopping, then canceled last minute, left me waiting for 2 hours. Mom, he started, but I kept reading. Catalina had moved to the couch, her hands folded tightly in her lap. The notebook contained months of broken promises, casual dismissals, and times they'd made me feel small and incapable. I slid a photocopy of the relevant pages across the coffee table toward Dylan. "Keep this," I said gently, "in case you forget how we got here." His fingers shook slightly as he picked up the papers. Valerie, still holding those useless keys, stared at the notebook like it was a snake that might bite her. The next morning, they invited me to talk like adults at a trendy brunch spot downtown. The kind of place where $20 meals came with tiny portions and fancy names. We sat at a table by the window, morning sunlight making everything look deceptively cheerful. The waiter appeared with a mimosa I definitely hadn't ordered, setting it down in front of me with a practiced smile. "Compliments of the table," he said, nodding toward Dylan. Catalina had spread out manila folders across the table like she was conducting a business meeting. "We thought you might want to celebrate," Catalina said, her voice artificially sweet. "We've brought some paperwork to make everything easier for you." She slid a set of power of attorney forms toward me, the legal text dense and intimidating. But I was ready. From my purse, I pulled out my own set of papers, a revocation of power of attorney that I had notarized the week before. The date on my documents was more recent than theirs. "I had the same thought," I said, placing my papers on top of theirs. "Great minds think alike." The mimosa sat untouched while they stared at my paperwork in shock. My phone rang just as Catalina was trying to explain why her forms were different from mine. I answered on speaker, without checking who was calling, knowing exactly who it would be. My attorney's voice filled the space between us, like a referee entering a boxing ring. "Sloan, I wanted to confirm that any attempt to move, retitle, or change insurance on the vehicle will trigger automatic legal notice to the Gray Mobility Trust," she said clearly. "The protections we discussed are all in place and active." Valerie set her mimosa glass down harder than necessary, the clink echoing across nearby tables. Other diners glanced our way, sensing drama. Catalina's careful composure was starting to crack around the edges like old paint. "Also," my attorney continued, "I wanted you to know that your estate plan is now completely private. No one can access those details without your written permission." The weight of those words settled over the table like a heavy blanket. Dylan looked like he wanted to disappear into his chair. Catalina's folders suddenly seemed much less important. The brunch crowd chattered around us, but our table had gone completely silent. The mimosa bubbles rose and popped, the only movement in our frozen tableau. I let my mind drift back 3 weeks earlier, to the day I'd sat in the car dealership with my attorney beside me. The salesperson had been kind and patient, explaining options while I signed the purchase agreement. But instead of putting the car in my name alone, I'd assigned it directly to the Gray Mobility Trust. "Smart thinking," the salesperson had said quietly when my lawyer stepped away. "I see a lot of seniors with pushy families. This way, you stay in control." She'd recommended the anti-theft device with driver authentication, mentioning it worked especially well for families with boundary issues. I'd paid extra for the tamper alert system, the kind that sent notifications to my phone if anyone tried to override the security settings. Every feature had been chosen carefully, every option selected with purpose. While I sat in that dealership chair, I was already 3 steps ahead of today's conversation. The memory faded as I focused back on the brunch table where Dylan was still staring at my attorney's papers like they were written in a foreign language. Sometimes the best defense is preparation they never see coming. Back in the present, Dylan leaned forward with renewed determination. "Look, Mom, I'll cover your insurance costs if you let Valerie keep the car," he offered. "I'll take care of everything financial." His voice carried the tone of someone making a generous sacrifice. I took a sip of water and asked quietly, "Which account would you use, yours or the one you opened for my convenience?" The question hung in the air like smoke. His face flushed red as he realized I knew about the bank account he'd set up with my name on it. That's different," he stammered. That's just to help you manage things. But we both knew what it really was. A way to control my money while making it look like help. Catalina jumped in quickly. We're just trying to make things easier for you, Sloane. Her voice was strained, like she was trying to hold too many things at once and feeling them slip. I smiled calmly and mentioned, I have a meeting with the bank manager tomorrow morning. We'll see how convenient that account really is. The color drained from both their faces. They were starting to understand that I'd been watching, planning, and preparing while they thought I was just getting older and more manageable. When I got home, there was an envelope from the HOA in my mailbox. Inside was the monthly newsletter with a small photo that made me smile. The security camera had captured Valerie's frustrated attempt to drive away, then stepping out of the car with her hands thrown up in defeat. The caption read, Reminder, all vehicles must be properly registered with authorized drivers. The timing was perfect. My neighbors would see this image and draw their own conclusions about what had happened in my driveway. Over the next few days, neighbors began waving at me with what looked like sympathy and respect. Mrs. Sanders stopped by with cookies, mentioning she'd heard some family troubles and wanted to check on me. The community was quietly taking sides, and it wasn't the side Dylan and Catalina expected. I decided to RSVP to the upcoming HOA barbecue and requested 5 minutes on the community agenda. If they wanted to make this public, I was ready to tell my side of the story. Sometimes the best way to protect yourself is to step into the light instead of hiding in the shadows. Tuesday morning, a tow truck rumbled down my street and stopped in front of my house. The driver, a stocky man in work clothes, knocked on my door with paperwork in hand. Got a call about moving a vehicle to storage, he said politely. Valerie appeared behind him, looking triumphant. I thought this might help you move the car somewhere more convenient, she announced. My garage has plenty of space. Her smile was all teeth and no warmth. But when the tow truck driver checked the title and registration, his expression changed. He saw the lien, the trust information, and the restricted status clearly marked in the system. Ma'am, I can't touch this vehicle, he told Valerie. There's legal paperwork that prevents any unauthorized movement. He turned to me instead, tipping his cap respectfully. Sorry for the confusion, Mrs. Gray. You have a good day. The truck rumbled away, leaving Valerie standing on my driveway empty-handed. I'll call someone else, she threatened, her voice sharp with frustration. But I just smiled peacefully and said, Please do. I'm sure they'll tell you the same thing. The law was on my side, and every call she made would just confirm it. At the bank the next morning, I sat across from the manager's polished desk while she explained the new security measures on my accounts. Everything now requires your in-person biometric confirmation, she said, typing notes into her computer. No one else can authorize transfers or changes. The relief I felt was immediate and warm. My money was truly mine again, protected by fingerprints and retinal scans that couldn't be forged or stolen. I'd also like to move some funds into the Gray Mobility Trust, I said, for ongoing mobility and dignity expenses. She smiled as she processed the transfer. That's a wonderful name for a trust, she said. Very meaningful. I left the bank with a sealed envelope addressed to Catalina, documents that would make my boundaries crystal clear. The morning sun felt brighter as I walked to my car. Each step felt lighter, like I was carrying less weight than I had in months. The envelope in my purse contained more than just legal papers. It contained my Declaration of Independence. Catalina was going to get an education about respecting her elders, whether she wanted one or not. At home, I placed the sealed envelope under a sunflower magnet on my refrigerator, right where Catalina would be sure to see it. Inside was a copy of my updated living will, plus a letter I'd spent hours crafting about boundaries and respect. But the real surprise was the invitation tucked behind the legal documents, a volunteer schedule for earning driving privileges. Anyone, including Valerie, could use the car for medical appointments and grocery runs, but only after completing community service hours. Help others. Help yourself. When Catalina arrived that afternoon for her weekly check-in, she spotted the envelope immediately. Her fingers shook as she opened it, reading through pages that redefined our entire relationship. The volunteer schedule particularly caught her attention. 3 hours of community service for each hour of car use. She stared at the word earn like it was written in a foreign language. The concept seemed alien to her, that access to my resources might require something other than family relations. Silence settled over the kitchen as she processed what this meant for all of them. The free ride was over. I drove to the senior center that afternoon, taking my time on the familiar roads. The director, Remy, greeted me warmly in the lobby, her face beaming with genuine appreciation. "Sloan, I can't thank you enough for sponsoring our new ride program," she said, leading me to a small ceremony area. They'd installed a brass plaque near the entrance, Medical Transportation Program sponsored by the Gray Mobility Trust. My car sat in the parking lot with a modest sign explaining its mission: medical rides, grocery trips, and independence for those who needed it most. Several seniors approached to thank me personally. "Finally, I can get to my doctor appointments," said one woman with a walker. "My daughter lives 3 states away," explained another man. "This is a godsend." Their gratitude was real and immediate, unlike the entitled demands I'd been facing at home. Remy mentioned that the local hospital was holding a charity gala next week and wondered if I'd like to attend. "We'd love to feature your program," she said. "It's exactly the kind of community initiative they celebrate." I accepted gladly, already imagining Valerie's face when she discovered where my car really lived. Catalina served me dinner that evening. Overcooked salmon that tasted like cardboard and disappointment. "This whole car thing is performative," she said, cutting her food with unnecessary force. "You're just trying to make a point." I passed her the printed volunteer schedule I'd prepared, watching her scan the list of available slots at the food bank, senior center, and literacy program. "These are meaningful opportunities to help others," I said calmly. "The car is available to anyone willing to earn the privilege." Valerie, who'd been invited to dinner specifically for this conversation, scoffed loudly. "I don't volunteer," she announced, like the very idea was beneath her dignity. "I'm not some charity case." Her voice carried the disdain of someone who'd never had to ask for help. I smiled gently and said, "Then you don't drive it." The simplicity of the equation seemed to surprise her. No volunteering, no car access, no contribution, no privilege. The rules were clear and fair, applied equally to everyone regardless of their sense of entitlement. Catalina's fork clinked against her plate in the uncomfortable silence that followed. The HOA barbecue was held in the community park, with folding tables and portable speakers, creating a casual neighborhood atmosphere. When my turn came to speak, I approached the small microphone with the same calm confidence I'd been cultivating for weeks. "Growing older doesn't mean surrendering dignity," I began, my voice carrying clearly across the gathered neighbors. "It doesn't mean accepting that others know what's best for us better than we know ourselves." Light applause rippled through the crowd. I spoke for exactly 3 minutes about independence, respect, and the importance of legal protection for seniors. Nothing dramatic or angry, just honest words about maintaining autonomy in a world that often assumes age equals incapacity. 2 neighbors approached afterward to share their own stories about family boundary issues. Mrs. Patterson had dealt with a son who wanted to manage her finances. Mr. Walsh's daughter had tried to force him into assisted living against his wishes. I wasn't alone in this struggle. Someone had recorded my speech on their phone and posted it to the neighborhood app. By evening, it had been shared dozens of times with supportive comments. The community was paying attention, and they were on my side. Thursday morning brought an unexpected visitor, an insurance investigator responding to conflicting requests that had been filed on my policy. I invited him in and spread out all my documentation, the trust papers, lease agreements, and logs from the anti-theft device. He reviewed everything carefully, taking notes and asking clarifying questions. "Ma'am, I need to warn you that any unauthorized attempts to use this vehicle could void coverage for whoever tries," he said seriously. "Insurance fraud is a serious matter." The investigator's words hung in the air like a thundercloud. Catalina, who'd been listening from the kitchen, suddenly realized the legal risk she'd been pushing me toward. Not only would Valerie be unable to drive the car, but any attempt could jeopardize my entire insurance policy. "Thank you for the warning," I said sincerely. I'll make sure everyone understands the consequences." Catalina's face went pale as she calculated what this meant for her mother's driving privileges. The stakes had just gotten much higher than anyone expected. The consequences began snowballing in ways I hadn't anticipated. Dylan's boss, who lived just 2 streets over, had heard my HOA speech and approached Dylan at work Monday morning. "Hey, wasn't that your mom talking about senior rights at the barbecue?" he'd asked casually. By lunchtime, Dylan's colleagues were buzzing about the neighborhood drama. Someone had shared the video in their work group chat. The story of the stubborn mother-in-law who legally outmaneuvered her pushy family was spreading beyond our immediate community. That evening, Dylan sent me a text. "Can we talk? Just the 2 of us?" His message was shorter than usual, missing his typical confident tone. The public nature of our dispute was affecting his professional reputation, and he was finally ready to have a real conversation. I agreed to meet, but suggested we do it at my attorney's office. If he wanted to talk seriously about boundaries and respect, we needed a neutral location with professional oversight. The days of kitchen table negotiations were over. This required legal mediation. We sat in my attorney's conference room the following afternoon, sunlight streaming through tall windows onto the polished table. The formal setting seemed to shrink Dylan somehow, making him look younger and less certain than he had at home. My attorney outlined the difference between helping and controlling, using clear examples that applied directly to our situation. "Assistance honors someone's autonomy," she explained. "Control removes it. The distinction matters legally and ethically." Dylan listened quietly as she described various forms of elder abuse, including financial, manipulation, and emotional coercion disguised as care. When she finished, he signed an acknowledgement that he had no legal authority over my assets or decisions. Then I surprised him by sliding a second paper across the table, a template for an apology letter. "Take this home," I said gently. "Think about what you want to say and how you want to rebuild trust between us." His hands trembled slightly as he folded the paper. We both knew our relationship needed major repairs. The hospital charity gala was held in the grand ballroom of the downtown hotel, with soft lighting and elegant decorations creating an atmosphere of celebration and generosity. My sedan sat under spotlights near the entrance, polished to a mirror shine with professional signage explaining its purpose. "Donor vehicle, long-term lease, Sloan Gray," the placard read, "providing medical transportation and independence for community seniors." A short video played on a nearby screen showing elderly residents stepping in and out of the car, their faces bright with laughter and relief. Hospital staff members approached throughout the evening to thank me personally. "This program is changing lives," the director told me. "We've had a 40% increase in appointment attendance since it started." The impact was measurable and meaningful. Then I spotted her across the ballroom, Valerie in borrowed heels and a tight dress, her mouth hanging open as she stared at the car display. She'd come expecting a fancy party and found herself face to face with the truth about where her car actually belonged. The shock on her face was worth every penny I'd spent on legal fees. Valerie tried one final approach at the gala, cornering me near the dessert table with renewed determination. "You promised me that car, Sloan," she insisted loudly enough for nearby guests to overhear. "You gave me your word." But the hospital's legal counsel happened to be standing just behind her, having overheard the conversation. He stepped forward politely and pointed toward the trust documents displayed near the car. "Ma'am, those instruments are on file with our foundation office," he said professionally. "They're quite clear about the vehicle's purpose and ownership." Valerie's face flushed red as she realized she'd just made false claims in front of a lawyer and several witnesses. The other gala attendees had stopped their conversations to watch our exchange, creating an audience for her humiliation. I offered her a volunteer badge from my purse and smiled warmly. "There's a driving shift available next Saturday morning," I said kindly. 3 hours helping seniors get to medical appointments, then you can use the car for your errands afterward." She stared at the badge like it was contaminated, then turned and walked away without another word. The choice was hers: contribute to the community or walk away empty-handed. I watched her leave, knowing I'd given her every opportunity to be part of the solution. I drove home slowly that night, taking the long way through quiet neighborhoods where porch lights created pools of warmth in the darkness. At the first red light, I cut off the hospital wristband I'd been wearing for weeks and tossed it into my glove box. That chapter of my life was officially closed. Dylan and Catalina were waiting on my front porch when I pulled into the driveway, takeout bags from my favorite Chinese restaurant in their hands. They'd brought 2 letters, his handwritten apology and her typed boundary agreement, both sealed in matching envelopes. We sat at my kitchen table under the soft overhead light, sharing lo mein and fried rice while they explained how they wanted to rebuild our relationship. Their words were careful and genuine, acknowledging the mistakes they'd made and the changes they needed to make. I accepted their letters, not their excuses, but their commitment to do better. Trust would take time to rebuild, but we had to start somewhere. As I locked up the house that night, I felt lighter than I had in months. The last thing I said to them before they left was simple but clear. You can ride with me, if you remember whose hands are on the wheel. My car, my rules, my life. Finally, everything was exactly as it should be.